So good morning and welcome everybody. Welcome to this webinar on connected and automated driving in cities. It is about the question, how can cities prepare for it? Thank you for joining this webinar. We have a large number of participants, 55 at the moment, but we have many more registrations. So we shall see how people will come on board in the next few minutes. This webinar is organized by the Satellite and CoEXist projects. Both are Horizon 2020 projects. Siegfried Rupprecht, I'm the director of Rupprecht Consult here in Cologne, and we are involved in both these projects. We have decided to invite for this webinar because we think there is a great need, which we saw when we talked about automation in previous conferences in CIVITAS, but also in SUMP and in other contexts. Before really going into the substance of the meeting, I would like to show you a little bit the functionality of our webinar system. If you have problems hearing or if you want to talk later, we recommend you to dial in. There is a list of numbers, which are free numbers in some countries. So please check this out. Secondly, you will see during the presentation a poll box that you can also see in my presentation here, where we will ask you questions. We will be starting in a few moments with that. Please remember to mute yourself unless you're muted, as everybody is at the moment by default. But when I unmute for questions, remember to mute you back so that you don't hear background noises. Finally, there is a very important box. It is the question box in the right bar on the bar on the right-hand side, where we encourage you to put questions throughout the presentations. One of my colleagues will be monitoring these questions. He will respond to some if they are not clear enough, and we will bring them up later during the course of this webinar. One more point for information. If you're interested in the agenda, it is in the right-hand corner, accessible for you. And of course, at the end, we will give you a link for the handouts. This is the team of this webinar. Cyrus Gomari is in the background. He's the question and poll manager. Daniel Franco is sitting next to me in charge of technology. And my name is Siegfried Rupprecht. We have three great speakers. Bernard Cercai, also based here in Cologne, with me, Brian Matthews in Milton Keynes, and Adriano Alessandrini from the University of Florence, but today based in Rome due to the snow in Rome. So here's the structure of our webinar. After this brief introduction, Bernard Cercai will talk about automation. How far are we? How can we start planning? We will then take the example of Milton Keynes, a mid-sized city that is preparing for connected and automated driving. And then the third presentation from Adriano, what is the role of automation in public transport? We hope to have enough time for a lively discussion at the end. For questions, please be reminded again to use the question box at any time during the presentations. After each presentation, I will open the floor for a few minutes of questions. We suggest that we read out the questions in the box, but if somebody wants to speak, then you can raise your hand through the system, and then we can connect to you and hope that the transmission works well. In the end, of course, a block of questions. Can I now ask Cyrus to start the first poll question? It is basically about who you are, so that we understand a little bit who's joined. 67 participants we have at the moment. So please, everybody, if possible, make your choice. This is a very
all right. Now I've seen 50% have voted. Let's wait a few more seconds.
It is always good to know who's on, so that we can maybe remember this when we ask questions or we put the focus of presentations. Are we good now, Cyrus?
Now we have 80%. I'm going to close the poll, share the results.
Okay, so can you summarize for us, please?
So 15% are urban transport planners in public authorities, 27% consultants, 2% from the public transport operators, 29% from research institutions, and 27% from others.
Okay.
Yep.
That is a good mix of the community, the transport community in Europe. Do you have another question for us? I mentioned the CIVITAS program. Cyrus, can you open the next poll? Just to know how familiar you are, how much you know about the context of this webinar. It's a simple question. Cyrus, how are we doing?
Okay, now we have 85%. Okay, I'll close the poll now. It's
okay.
So a bit more than half actually know about CIVITAS.
Okay, that is good to know, because we're always eager to reach new people with our events and material. I now move on just to give a very quick introduction to the topic. We all know about the various expectations that people have of automation. It ranges really from support for aging drivers to serving certain areas better, saving costs, increasing safety, space. I have tried to order these positive points, maybe how in the order as they may materialize in reality. But of course, there are also very difficult points, maybe negative points. The most important topic that we can see in this list is that we are unclear about the impacts. So it is really uncertainty is the main topic when we talk about impacts of automation. What you also see from the list and from what you know about is that very often people talk about automation with a mix of different technologies and also different timings. So for us, this is really enough reason to think about the practical question, what can cities do? And in our webinar, we really want to follow the aim of contributing to an informed debate, starting a discussion among stakeholders on the European level, and actually helping cities to prepare policies. I mentioned the agenda, so I can move on to Bernard Gergely, who will build directly on what I just said, and I will invite him to present. So Bernard, please take over.
Okay, thank you very much, Siegfried. My name is Bernard Gergely. I'm a colleague of Siegfried's at Ruprecht Consult, and I am in this context a project coordinator of the Horizon 2020 CoEXist project that mainly deals with the issue of urban mobility in urban transport planning. It's great that so many of you have joined today and given up your lunchtime, or maybe you're having your lunch at the moment. And so far we have 68 participants. So the title of my presentation is basically Automation, how far are we and how can we start preparing? And when I mean we, I mean the sort of whole ecosystem that is based around urban transport planning. So it's good to see that there's a lot of cities present today, some consultants and research institutions who want to discuss the topic. So my agenda for the presentation is basically I will discuss terminology a little bit and the technology. Then I will look into the uncertainties for CIVITAS cities, but also this addresses all types of cities. And I will introduce you to the concept of automation readiness for cities, and will mention some very concrete automation ready measures and policies that cities can to take today in order to become automation ready. But let me start with a short poll question, just asking about your experience and your knowledge. How would you rate it for urban transport automation? Okay, so the scale is basically from beginner is 1 and then expert is 5.
Now we have 75% of the votes in. Let's wait a few more seconds, see if we get more answers. All right, I see that it's not changing anymore, so I'll close the poll. So yeah,
okay.
About a quarter are actually just beginners, and another quarter say they're about intermediate, and 10% of the attendees are actually experts on the topic.
Very, very impressive to have that many experts also present today. But of course, the most people in this field, because of these many uncertainties that exist in urban transport automation, are basically more beginners or building up a knowledge base regarding automation. So let me just start basically with what is the public image of urban automation. And of course, all of us have seen the so-called Google car, which is a vehicle designed for sharing, and it's a sort of a robo-taxi that could replace the use of private vehicles. The other view on automation that is very public is, of course, these automated shuttle services, and this is what Adriano will also mainly talk about in his presentation. It's about how to automate public transport vehicles. Then the third picture, public image of automation, is when you see have heard stories about the hands-free functionalities of a Tesla vehicle, where you can basically give over control to your own privately owned vehicle. The other sort of aspects of automations that are not debated so much in the public, or that many people are not aware, is basically that a lot of the intelligence in order to have good automation would sit more in the roadside infrastructure. This is often called like CITS, so Cooperative ITS solutions, and also the communication between the vehicle and other vehicles, which is V2V, or with the infrastructure like traffic lights, so V2I. Or there's the other thing like communication of the automated vehicle with X, so it can be any other devices, so V2X. So for example, a pedestrian could even wear a device in the most extreme case. And then there are also some more exotic solutions that so far have not been publicized very much, but they're also a plausible solution to deploying automation in cities. So for example, Nissan actually works on a concept which is called human-in-the-loop automation, where, for example, an automated vehicle is driving in the city, but has some problems navigating itself due to unexpected roadworks or an accident. And then a remote driver from a traffic control center would take over that car and drive it around the obstacle. So there's a number of different technological possibilities. And the question is really, which type of vehicle will you see first on your road network? And to be honest, I cannot provide you with that answer, and I don't think many can provide you with that answer today, because it is not clear about which technology will actually, at the end, win the technological race and which will appear in our cities. Then looking into the terminologies that are often related to automation, I think most of you are familiar with the so-called SAE levels of automations. SAE stands for the Society of Automotive Engineers. And the scale basically ranges from 0 to 5. 0 is basically where you drive yourself an old vehicle and there's no kind of assistance system supporting you. Most modern cars today already have level 1 or level 2 functionalities. And when we think about the fully automated public transport vehicle or the Google car, then we are kind of moving into the level 4 and 5, where there is no driver and the driver becomes actually more of a passenger. But very important, and I think in the public debate, one aspect is not mentioned when you talk about SAE levels, is that each SAE level is really dependent on the operational design domain of where the vehicle is meant to drive. So, for example, a vehicle today can achieve SAE level 4 in the right operational driving domain, so a public transport vehicle, for example, but this would require significant changes to the physical and digital road infrastructure for it to be able to function. Also, one important aspect to explain is that the change between level 4 and 5 is actually quite dramatic, because level 4 is kind of full level automation, but in one specific operational driving domain. But level 5 would mean that the vehicle can drive anywhere without actually having adjusted infrastructure, or physical or digital infrastructure. But moving on regarding the SAE levels, it's actually from an urban transport policy context, so from a CIVITAS context, SAE levels are actually not that relevant as many think. The main reason for that is that the SAE levels come really from a vehicular engineering perspective, and they describe the interaction between the driver/passenger and the automated vehicles. But they do not describe the operational purpose of the actual vehicle. And I will explain to you what I mean with operational purpose, but in the next slide. But I want to say here that I don't believe that any city will ever develop policies based on SAE levels, but the policies will be more based along the potential deployment paths of automated vehicles and how these vehicles are going to be used. So if we look into the three most basic scenarios that exist for automated vehicles, we have the automated private vehicle, which is basically a continuous development of driver assistance systems that currently exist in cars, and then the vehicle will become more and more automated. This will then most likely lead to a shift to more automated privately owned vehicles. And the result of that is that vehicle miles traveled will of course increase significantly, because the privately owned car will be more attractive. Another scenario is basically that automated vehicles will not be owned, but they will be shared. And those will have a SAE level of 4 or 5. The vehicles are available on demand, and there are empty rides possible so that they can redistribute themselves depending on demand. And this will hopefully decrease then privately owned vehicles and also reduce the overall number of vehicles in a city. And then there is the scenario looking into automated public transport. So where little public transport automated vehicles can act as a feeder to the core public transport network. And this would hopefully then make public transport more attractive. In a survey of the 24 largest German cities, they were asked about which of these three scenarios they would prefer most. And of course, all cities said that they would prefer the second and the third scenario the most. But then they were also asked which one of these scenarios is most likely to happen first. And then all of them clearly said that they worry that the automated private vehicle will first take over their cities, and in that way making the car even more attractive. So let me ask you the next poll question. So when do you think you will have connected and automated driving widespread in your city?
Okay, half of the participants have voted. Let's wait a few more seconds to give them time to estimate this. All right, about 90% have voted. I'm closing the poll now. All right, so about 30% think it's 0 to 10 years from now, and about 42% believe it's going to be 11 to 20 years. 23% think, or 30% think it's going to be 20 years and beyond. So these are their estimations.
Okay, yeah, that's, I think the results sort of confirm also my understanding about when the first vehicles will enter the road network in the cities. Could I have the presentation back? Okay. And this also goes along the predictions from that are done every year by a company called Gartner from the US. They're a technology consultancy, and they issue every year the so-called hype cycle for emergent technologies. And right on top of this hype cycle last year in July, at least, there was the automated vehicles, which basically the peak shows, it's called the peak of inflated expectations. And Gartner, at least, they suggest that at the moment our expectations from the technology are far too inflated, and that there is still some, that our expectations will have to go down, and we have to actually come to realization what this technology can provide to us. But we've talked a lot about the sort of technological uncertainties that exist for cities, but what do they actually mean concretely? So, for example, what can cities do now in such a hyped environment, because there's so many uncertainties about the availability of the technology, the functions of the technology, and, for example, the impact on safety? And what is the time frame for implementation of this technology? So level 5 sharing systems might still be far away, but level 4 public transport with adjusted infrastructure is actually possible today. And what is and if we decide to have level 4 public transport vehicles, what exactly are the infrastructure requirements, both the physical and the digital infrastructure requirements? And how do we organize ourselves in this very long, messy transition period where we'll have normal vehicles, levels 2 and 3 vehicles, and then maybe already some level 4 vehicles, all mixed on one road network? And what is the overall impact for cities, specifically on vehicle kilometers traveled? Will they increase or will they decrease? But this list can, of course, go on. But the real effect that we can identify today, the result of these uncertainties, is that at the moment, connected and automated vehicles are not mentioned in transport plans or in sustainable mobility plans or other strategic planning documents. So for an example here, in CoEXist, we have 4 partner cities, and here are the planning documents for 2 of them, so Gothenburg and the city of Stuttgart. And both these documents are meant to plan the transport network until 2030 or 2035. And when you search for the word of automation in both these documents, they actually don't appear once. So how are cities meant to plan for this expected technological developments, but if they don't actually have mentioned them in their strategic planning documents yet? So the next poll question is, has your city, or are you aware whether the city where you live basically have they included or start preparing for connected and automated driving?
Okay, now we have about 70%. 78. All right, I'm closing the poll now if there are not more answers. Okay. All right, so actually the majority of our participants say they do not know, or it doesn't appear in their strategic mobility plans of their cities.
Okay, that's very interesting. So for those who said that they already have a high degree with detail or some inclusion, then I would be really interested to hear from your examples. So please share those documents with us, either through the chat box or just by email afterwards. Okay, but then moving on. So if we identify a problem that CAVs are at the moment not mentioned in planning documents, but then the other question is, what kind of policy goals can CAVs actually support for urban transport planning? So again, I'm referring to this survey of the 24 largest German cities, where they were asked to mention the most important urban policy goals that they are following at the moment. And you can clearly see that most German cities, which I think is a kind of a good example for all over Europe, they want to promote cycling and walking at this moment, or they want to support public transport. They want to reduce congestion, save energy, shift to more sustainable modes, and improve safety. And then they were asked about what they actually expect automation can contribute to each specific policy goal. And here the results are a bit negative. So for example, German cities at the moment believe that automation would have a negative impact on cycling and walking, a negative impact on public transport, a neutral impact for congestion and energy saving, a negative impact on the shift to sustainable modes, and only one positive effect on better safety. So there is clearly a discrepancy between what the industry sort of expects from automations and what cities at the moment expect what automation can contribute to their policy goals. So the next poll question is really, what do you think? Can automation really support the city mobility goals and sustainability goals?
Okay. So 50% of the votes are in. 70, 80. All right, I'm going to show the results. So 4% say no, it is against some of our goals. 6% say the disadvantages outweigh the benefits. About 60% say yes, but only in very specific contexts. 9% say yes, it supports all our goals. 22% are uncertain of how automation could support or will support their mobility and sustainability goals.
Okay, that's an interesting result. So the clear majority says yes, but only in specific contexts or under specific conditions. So then, yeah, that's the question. How do we create these specific contexts and these specific conditions? And that is exactly the aim of the CoEXist project that I am coordinating, where we really want to systematically increase the capacity of European local authorities and other urban mobility stakeholders to get ready for the transition towards a shared road network with increasing penetration rates of CAVs. So what do I mean here in this context with automation readiness? And currently we have a definition for it, which we're of course also consulting with a number of stakeholders currently. So at the moment, automation readiness is defined as conducting transport and infrastructure planning for automated vehicles in the same comprehensive manner as for existing modes, such as conventional vehicles, public transport, and so on, but while ensuring continued support for existing modes and higher level mobility goals. So currently we're going through a stakeholder consultation regarding this definition. So I would be also really interested to hear your feedback on this definition. Maybe you can send it by email after the webinar, because we are aware that this definition might have to be adapted for specific modes. And it might also need to be adapted over time, because maybe at this moment, cities cannot become automation ready, or they should not become automation ready, but there's more of a drive towards cities should become automation aware. And concretely within CoEXist, we tackle three aspects of automation readiness. So first of all, it's automation ready transport modeling, because currently at this moment, it's impossible for cities to actually simulate automated vehicles in their transport models. And this is what we are changing. So after the project, cities will get default behavior parameter sets that they can apply to simulate automated vehicles. We will look into automation ready road infrastructure. We will come up with some design suggestions regarding to automation. And we will also work on creating automation ready road authorities. So for that, we are currently elaborating 8 use cases in Gothenburg, Helmond, Milton Keynes, and Stuttgart. And with these cities, we are developing so-called automation ready action plans. So concretely, the CoEXist project at the moment is working on creating a automation ready framework. This will encompass guidance on issues like technology, impacts, and measures. And this will then help cities to make clear-headed and informed decisions about automation. And we're also creating automation FAQ for cities. So basically collecting the most basic questions regarding automation. If you have any questions, then please send them across to you and we will try to answer them. And the first version of this framework is currently being developed and should be released to the public within the next 2 months. And concretely, we're also working on automation-ready action plans with our cities. There we want to create a bottom-up local stakeholder process through automation-ready fora, where we will consult with local stakeholders on identifying measures that cities can do today, in 5 years' time, or in 10 years' time, in order to become automation ready. And we hope that these action plans will become a sort of an annex to strategic transport planning documents or SUMPs. So what sort of measures can cities take today, maybe in order to reach automation awareness? And here it's really to start a good informed stakeholder debate about technology and potential risks. And this is also what Brian from Milton Keynes will briefly mention. And it's also important to kind of understand the potential contributions of driverless vehicles to the city goals. And it's also important to create a communication and cooperation with other actors interested in automation. So for example, cities should also actively search for a dialogue with vehicle manufacturers. And potentially you could already plan and implement pilot measures and testing different types of vehicles at this stage. So moving on, I think the most important thing that cities can also do today in order to rather support the shared automated vehicles is to already promote sharing today. So for example, with car sharing facilities. So to create a new mobility culture that is really accepted by the citizens. Then moving on, looking at the time, I don't have enough time to go through the entire list, but what cities can do in the medium term, so maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, are aspects such as to integrate automated vehicles in their transport demand models, to work on predictions about what the impact of the technology will be on travel demand. Then moving on just to the final prediction, which is what can cities do in the next 10 to 20 years time, which this phase we can call basically automation implementation. And this is where really cities should start with institutional adjustments. So to see what kind of organizational structure do they require. So for example, they could think about creating a specific department for mobility as a service. And only also in that period, we would suggest to start with infrastructure adjustments. And there really the most basic infrastructure should be looked at, like for example, road markings or speed limits. And then to look into what the purpose is of collective mobility services. Where can automation support these services? And that's when I think it's also only in that period the tendering of automated public transport vehicles becomes relevant. So these are basically the sort of measures we are suggesting. In the framework, we will of course describe these measures in more detail. And we're also looking forward to hear some of your ideas for measures that cities can take today. But as in the conclusion, we can say that cities should act now in order to become automation aware. And it is important to create a policy framework in order to support, to inhibit inefficiencies and frustrations that might be created. And it's also important to understand that the SAE levels are not that important for policy making. And it's important to create a common vision for automation and goals in order by, for example, integrating automation in sustainable mobility plans or other planning documents. So thank you very much for listening, and back to Siegfried.
Okay. Many thanks, Bernhard, for this clear presentation. Can I ask Cyrus, are there many questions? How are we doing with the interaction with the audience, of which we have 73 participants now, 68 not non-organizers?
One question came up during the poll question from Stein, is it? He was asking which city has a SUMP with high CAD integration. So whoever the participant was, it would be good if you could type this into the chat function, so we would know which city this is.
Okay, so maybe the participants wants to make up his or her mind and identify him or herself, and then perhaps we can share the information. I'm sure this would be appreciated by everybody participating. Okay, we're a little bit delayed, so I would rather move on. Our next presenter is Brian Matthews, and I'm trying to persuade my presentation to move, which I could not. Okay, now it's coming. Okay, again, Brian Matthews. He's the head of transportation innovation in Milton Keynes Council, a project partner of CoEXist, and a great presenter. So, Brian, how are you doing today? Are you good?
I'm very well, thank you. It's a beautiful sunny day, although it's cold in the UK, so it's a lovely day to look out of the window and participate at this at the same time.
Okay, so great. Over to you. I'll switch myself off, and you have the floor.
Okay. Well. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you today, and allow me to tell you a little bit about what we're undertaking in Milton Keynes. I don't seem to have control of the screen. I'm very sorry for that.
No, you should have now. I was slow. You are okay. I was slow, but it's good now.
You can see the screen now?
It's going well, Brian. You can continue, and you have to.
I can continue. Okay, you can see my screen now. I've just lost a little bit of feedback there. So, in terms of Milton Keynes, perhaps it's best if I start a little by explaining where we are in the UK. Milton Keynes is, as you can see from the plan, is around midway between London and Birmingham, on very good, strong transport networks, radial routes out of linking our cities. As a new town, we started in 1967. We were a greenfield site at that time, and the city has developed now to a population that's close to 270,000 people. So fairly rapid growth over the past 50 years. Perhaps this is illustrated with the next slide that shows that growth that has continued and sustained for that period. And we're talking in number terms, around 15 people every day move to Milton Keynes. And with the growth of the city and its strong employment links, we import 25% of our workforce, so around 30,000 people a day, to come and work in the city. So a very successful new town in the UK context. And it's been recently identified within the UK context as a strategic area for the continual development of the country's industrial and housing strategies. So linked with Oxford and Cambridge, the growth in the area is going to continue. And when you think about that presents a challenge for us, and also perhaps opportunities. As a planned city, we reached our planned status in about 3 or 4 years ago, and everything's working pretty well. We generally have low levels of congestion, no air quality problems, and generally mobility is pretty good for everyone. But with our plans now, we're looking to develop the city to double in size over the next 20 to 30 years. And that will present challenges for us. And we need to think about how we deal with those, because there's a great appetite within the city to continue its successful growth and development. So it was very important for us to set this into a context of a futures plan, looking very much into the future. And whereas that slide only says 400,000 people by 2050, since this report was published last year, we've got an appetite actually to go to 500,000 people. And it's starting to think about how the city can develop, and its plans are emerging for the future. And within this, the Strategic Futures Report, which was put together, perhaps explained by an independent commission, so it includes not only the elected representatives of the local authority, but also a wide spread of academia, industrial experts, community experts to put that together and really try to answer how do we make a great city even greater. And within the context of this report, we identified Project 4, which I'll come on to in a bit more detail a little later. And this is about smart, shared, sustainable mobility. So really looking to the future. And it's interesting in the poll answer that the 30-year horizon for more connected autonomous vehicles entirely fits in with our planning, that we're expecting that to happen within our city by 2050. And happily, that detail is now cascaded into a council strategy with the detail emerging within this programme. And it's interesting to note that this strategy is no longer called a transport strategy, it's a mobility strategy. And it really embraces new technology, looks at the mobility as a service concept, endorses fully the use of technology as a primary tool to support mobility, and just starts to look at the transition goals and the business cases around this. So this plan, it really covers a shorter time horizon, but really sets the council's stall out for how it will transition from where it is now, business as usual, around the traditional modes of transport, to start embracing the new technology that's coming along. I think we've probably already answered this question, so I don't know if we are going to run this question again. It's around the sustainable mobility plans and how much detail is included in preparing for connected and autonomous driving.
We can show the results, Brian, if you want to see them.
Yes, if we can show the results again, that would be useful.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the results of the questions were 56% of the participants don't know, or they don't have it at all in their SUMPs. 27% say this is being acknowledged in their plans. About 15% say there's some inclusion with limited detail, and about 2% of the participants say it is included with a high degree of detail.
Okay, that says interesting, and I suppose from the context of the UK and my contacts around Europe, that doesn't necessarily surprise me, because this is an emerging technology and ideas, but I do think there will be a rapid increase in the interest in putting these plans within urban mobility plans as we move forward. And looking at how we're looking at that in Milton Keynes around include them in the future plans, we undertook a piece of work that we try to roadmap to the future in the context specifically of Milton Keynes. So this is where we think the technology is developing in our area. And you can clearly see there's a timeline running up to 2030 in line with our plans. And we're really starting to think about how these will now feature in some detail in our mobility plans. But as you can see at the little diagram towards the bottom of the slide, we are in a period of guaranteed uncertainty. And perhaps what I can do now is talk a little bit around how Milton Keynes is trying to remove some of that uncertainty by some of the work we're doing within our projects. So I'll focus on, as I say, to look at how we can look to get a little bit more certainty, but it's by no means guaranteed, and in the specific case of autonomy. And if you don't mind, I'll use a use case of the UK Autodrome project, which is underway in Milton Keynes. Now, this project is a co-sponsored initiative by the UK government and the partners you can see on that slide. Well, the partners made up of in four areas really. The OEMs, the manufacturers, so we have Ford, Jaguar and Tata Motors providing vehicle technology. We have academia through the universities of Cambridge, Oxford and the Open Universities based in Milton Keynes. Some advisory roles from insurance companies and technical companies such as AXA, the MIRA, which is our research association, Tallies, which is looking at security, and some from the legal side of Raglow and Graham. And one other important company is RGM, who are making our low-speed autonomous vehicles or pods. So this program is valued around £20 million. It's currently underway. We're close to the end now. We're 2.5 years into the project, and we're about at the sharp end of demonstrating some of the capabilities that are coming through from autonomous vehicles. The project has three facets. I'll just explain those very briefly. One is to deploy real autonomous level 3-4 vehicles on open roads within the city, and they've been provided by the manufacturers. A demonstration of a public transport system within Milton Keynes, and finally a research program that is starting to answer some of the questions we're posing to start to look to remove some of the uncertainty I mentioned. But perhaps it's important just to emphasize the role that the city has taken in leadership in this program. The picture there is of our council leader, who is very pleased to have one of the first goes in autonomous vehicle within Milton Keynes. And so the council, the city is setting the agenda with some very high level support from partners from the university research sector, with the primary aim of what we're trying to look at is to look at the long-term benefits and application of autonomous vehicles to the urban environment, but specifically within our city. So the hypothesis we've set, it suggested that connected and driverless cars could have a significant impact on providing safe, efficient, low-carbon mobility to the public. And the four areas that are generally cited as where the benefits lie are around safety, where it is suggested that perhaps up to 90% of accidents are currently caused by humans within the driver. Productivity, that's the amount of time that we potentially waste in the driving function. Typically in the UK, the average time in the car on the commute is 2 hours per day. Capacity, the idea that self-driving vehicles can be more efficient in using the road space. And in terms of mobility, can mobility be improved for those who are currently deficient in the current transport systems? And the key questions very specific to Milton Keynes is that we're answering within the research element is taking a snapshot of the future. If we had 100% autonomous vehicles, what would be the impact on congestion within our city? Remembering going back to the scenario where we're looking to double in size, and that generally means a doubling in transport demand. What, if any, improvements would in mobility would the first and last mile transport system within the city centre context, delivered by small vehicles, sharing services, could that deliver for the city? And what is the business case for this low-speed autonomous transport system? And importantly, what's the public view and what is the direction of travel in their opinion? So perhaps we could launch another poll question. What do you think are the primary reasons for developing connected and autonomous vehicles within your city or your experience?
All right. You can select all that apply, all that you think are the reasons for developing CAD. We now have about 60% of the votes. Let's wait a few more seconds. All right, now I'm closing the poll. So in the order of the ranking, the majority think the first reason would be improving safety, followed by reducing congestion, followed then by increasing mobility options, and then improving productivity. And about 8% of the answers were none of the above.
Okay, that's really interesting. Now, I'll perhaps come on to some of those results when I talk a little bit about the public attitude surveys we've run here in Milton Keynes.
Mm-hmm.
So in specific detail within the project Autodrive is to look at the improved capacity, the headroom on our roads through the widespread introduction of self-driving vehicles. Our approach to this is, as I said, to take a snapshot in the future of what the capacity would be, and to achieve that, we've looked beyond I suppose, the realms of the CoEXist project to look at some time in the future, perhaps 30 years in the future, with 100% penetration. And to do that, we've created a vision transportation model that's working in close collaboration with the vehicle manufacturers to input some of the features of the vehicles, their performance into our modelling. And we should be reporting the results of that within the next couple of months to show what is happening there. The second application is to deliver a low-speed pod service within the city centre environment of Milton Keynes. Now, these vehicles will be small vehicles carrying up to 4 people that can operate on shared surfaces of footways with pedestrians and cyclists. And the basic principle around this is to try to understand the features, the facets, the issues with developing an on-demand, anywhere-to-anywhere service within a relatively small area, but with great densification coming along. And again, the practical issues we want to look at is if we double in size of the city, we need to use a land space that we currently give over to car parking for other uses. And how do we then maintain mobility within the centre? So the technology is looking alongside the real practical application of a future use within the city centre environment. This service, as I say, will start to launch in demonstration modes in June, July this year, and we'll be deploying up to 40 vehicles operating on a typical working day. And as I say, we're looking to learn and understand the potential future business case around this. A further aspect, and it's very important to remember this, we do have to work with the public and understand their views as a city authority. And I've just thrown up a snapshot of a national survey we've been involved in understanding what the views are of the public. And we're taking this snapshot picture at the start of the project, and here are just some of the basic results that came out of that survey. And we'll be also undertaking a service towards the end of the project to try to understand if the views are changing. Our initial findings are that there is a mood within the public that hard opinions haven't yet been set, and there's general positivity around the notion of self-driving vehicles, and we need to understand if that's going to be maintained. Interestingly, in line with the poll results, the area where the public felt there was less benefit was around productivity, and they wouldn't use their time in the autonomous vehicles other than to look out of the windows. So they're grabbing some relaxation time back. And the link there is to the Autodrive website, where you can get all the detail of the 49-question survey that we undertook around a year ago now. And so if I can just wind up a little bit on some of the lessons learned through the Autodrive and our experience in Milton Keynes we have to recognise this technology is still in development, and perhaps some areas are not as mature as you would have you believe when you read all the press around some of the initiatives that are going on. The legal, regulatory, insurance issues are very important, but they shouldn't be seen as a complete barrier to moving forward. We've found insurers, legal partners, regulators want to help. It is, after all, their future business model. And similarly, the car manufacturers want to work with cities to get an understanding of what could be very key to their future markets and business development opportunities. And having cities set the agenda is a real positivity for them. And again, perhaps some words, if you don't mind, on considerations for other cities, other areas, is to take advantage of the position city have in driving the agenda forward. As I say, it's a business opportunity for many out there, and more and more we're finding partners want to work with the city authorities in common shared objectives and goals. Again, understand what you want to achieve from the technology, the development, and tailor that through your local plans, and then demonstrate how it can accelerate your wider objectives around developing your areas. Collaboration is very key, and it can bring funding or business opportunities with partners. So widen the normal scope around how cities work with other wider partners, and it has brought fruit, certainly in the Milton Keynes context. And again, there's great excitement at national level through government and industry, so it's good to work with it at a national level to support your local agenda. And the last point is take advantage of the general support that's being shown from the public. Our surveys suggesting the jury's out there, and it's an ideal opportunity to work with the public. So in summary, I think for a city, it's providing the clarity and leadership in setting the agenda is important. It has to deliver the local objectives for it to move forward for cities. Actively exploring the use of technology, it ensures a city can develop in line with short and long-term visions. We've moved a long way away with the predict and provide models, a way we build infrastructure, build our way out of trouble. I don't think that's a sustainable way forward in the future. And start making with the plan making to work at a detail level to enable the deployment of technology. So that was a bit of a quick canter through what we are undertaking here in Milton Keynes. And so thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to respond to any questions now or later in the morning. Thank you.
Many thanks, Brian. This was a great presentation. There was one concrete question to you, a context question. It is about the modal shift, especially the share of cars in your city. Could you respond to that, please?
Yes, the modal shift is very highly in favour of cars. We're around 85 to 90% some days, certainly for commuting. The design of the city was very much focused on supporting that as a mode of transport when we laid our plans in the 1960s, when some of the issues of congestion, air quality weren't quite thought about. So part of our strategy is to work with the car, and other initiatives in the city are looking to remove the carbon, and autonomy and shared use is another way of achieving the shift away from that single mode.
Mm-hmm. A second question has come up as to the operation of the system. I suggest that if you have a quick answer, then I would invite you to give it. Otherwise, we can have a discussion on that a little bit later. Do you want to comment now, Brian?
I can try a quick comment, the question.
Yes, please. So,
sorry, I didn't have to.
Who will operate the transport as a service? Would it be private stakeholders in a public utility, the communities, or would it be free for all? So different questions.
With the context of the UK, the general trend is to have public transport operation undertaken by the private sector. So we're trying to establish the business case to stimulate some private sectors, and whether there's a partnership with the local authority to begin with to prime this service, that may come ahead, but we're really looking to move it into the commercial sector very quickly. It's not the role of UK local authorities to operate public transport services.
That is a clear statement and a bizarre one in some countries, but we understand the context.
We're I think, slightly different in the way we deregulated our public transport operation in the UK.
Yes, you are. So thank you again for your presentation. We're now moving from a city which is under 100 years old to a city which is several thousand years old, but which is a great city too. I'm talking about Rome, of course. Adriano, I will give you everything that you have to have in order to start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Siegfried. Yes, actually, I'm from the University of Florence, so I moved some year ago from the eternal city Rome to a beautiful city in itself, but it's more a Renaissance city, which is Florence. However, today I'm stuck in Rome because of the snow. We just had 40 centimeters of snow tonight, so I couldn't take a train this morning. However, I managed to actually get connected no matter what. What I'm going to talk to you about is the role of automation in public transport, and specifically I will use my experience of coordinator of the City Mobile 2 project to actually maybe making some controversial statement. What is City Mobile 2? I think that this is a so well-known project that we decided not to explain it into details. I will just say that it's concluded 1 year and something ago. It has been the widest European initiative on fully automated road transport systems. From 2012 to 2016, we carried 7 large-scale demonstrators in which we brought 60,000 passengers on fully automated minibuses on shared infrastructures on public roads. So based on this experience and whatever we made afterwards, we actually devised a very interesting approach to automation for public transport, which I will talk through you about. But I would like, first of all, to see whether we can go to the first poll. We have 2 polls just at the beginning. The first is how and where do you expect automation to be first deployed, whether it will be in privately owned vehicles, ride-shared vehicles, or public transport. I don't know, Sirius, if you can maybe show the poll.
It is on their screens now. Let's wait for some votes. Okay, we have about 60% of the votes, 70. A couple of more seconds. All right, I'm closing the poll now, sharing the results. So about 16% think it should be deployed through privately owned vehicles. 27% think it should be through ride sharing or vehicle sharing, and 53% think road-based public transport, which is the main focus of this presentation, and 4% say none of the above or other forms.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. So whether you want to go back to the presentation or show directly the next poll, I don't know. The next poll is basically how significant of an impact do you expect automation to have on public transport? And it ranges from none, it changes nothing, to low, it could support, but I'm not sure, to up to level 5, which is significant and will transport public transport as we know it.
Okay.
Sirius, can you launch the poll?
Mm-hmm. There you go. There's been a mistake with the options. Please select only one option, one choice. Okay, we have 75%. I'm closing the poll now. So about 0% saying nothing will change, so there will always be a change. 13% say the impact would be low. 43% say medium. It could lead to new public transport services. 30% say the impact would be high, which means will make public transport more attractive compared to other modes. And 23% think it will definitely be significant, and it could possibly transform public transport as we know it.
Actually, I'm really very glad to see how well you are convinced that automation will be a revolution, because it will be a revolution. It will either be the revolution that launches a new century public transport service, or it will be the revolution that destroys public transport service for good. If we can go back to the presentation, you will see in this slide a quick comparison between our shared vehicles, our public transport vehicles on the right-hand side of CityMobile 2 and the Google car. Basically, which is the great difference between these two technologies? Well, first of all, the Google car is conceived to be door-to-door. So they plan to share in terms of ownership, but not to share in terms of ridership. The vehicle, in fact, is small, and you will only share it with the people you share the trip with. So the people, people who are traveling with you. While in the other case, you definitely share it. And in one case, you go from door to door, always in the same vehicle. In the other case, you just are brought to the next station of another kind of transport service, which might be more suitable for that kind of journey. So it is by definition multimodal. However, from this, it descends the next two bullet points, that the Google car needs to go from anywhere to anywhere and using any kind of infrastructures. Actually, this is very difficult to do, because it means that the vehicle needs to be able, with only its technology on board, to actually navigate no matter what infrastructure. On our end, we basically use our service only on pre-selected routes and only on certified, eventually adapted infrastructures. And we will have full supervision. So basically, you will have a control center in which there will be a human ready to intervene in case there is anything that doesn't go. Now, this makes a huge difference also in technological terms, because while the Google car needs to deal with everything on its own, it needs to have the technology on board to be able to repair itself, to detect its faults, to be able to work even if it's not working. So, for example, they have a 3 redundant steering actuator. They have redundant power, because you cannot have the battery that simply goes off and leave the vehicle where it is. They need to have redundant sensing, redundant everything, which not only makes more costly the vehicle, it also makes it more complex. While on our case, as we only use our pre-certified infrastructures, we have very well conceived behaviors. In case we have anything that goes wrong, we have already conceived fail-safe operations. So what we do is basically, if the light goes off, if the battery is no longer powering, basically brakes are pre-actuated. So the vehicle will slow down and stop exactly in its trajectory. It will be, of course, a service disruption, but it will not hurt or kill or do anything wrong to anybody. Also, dealing with other users is incredibly different, because Google needs to forecast what the other users are doing. So they need to basically not only detect where they are or where they're going, but also try to forecast whether they will change their direction, go one way, the other. I mean, this is, don't get me wrong, it's an absolutely beautiful technology. However, to make it work for real, it will take a huge amount of time, and you will never be completely sure that it will actually be working. You will never be able to demonstrate in a deterministic way that the technology is working. While on our side, what we do is an integrated safety assessment. So what we do is that our infrastructures will be investigated beforehand, and you will actually know where you have to slow down beforehand, because you know that that part of the infrastructure is more dangerous. And in this case, you can simply react to anything that goes wrong by braking. And this goes the same with dealing with external problems. The Google car needs to recognize police, roadworks, etc. We can just communicate with the control room. Now, when you actually use these, we basically were able to transport safely 60,000 passengers on our low-speed last-mile shuttles sharing urban street with anybody else. And we learned that using these technologies on public transport is already feasible today. It doesn't need any trial. It doesn't need any more demonstrations. We know how to do it. We know how to do it well. And of course we do it safely. But remember this, there is no magic wand. Technology doesn't solve all the problem. A lot of people today behave badly on the street. Well, in Italy, maybe more than other places in Europe, but still people behave badly on the infrastructures because it is the common behavior to behave badly. It is normal not to respect rules on the street. While if you do not respect rules, you cause safety threats. And safety threats will not be solved all simply by technology. So if you design your system to become safe through a thorough urban integration study, it will actually be safe, and so much safe to become rail safety standards, 100 times safer than your current system. Second important point, speed is crucial for everything. First, is crucial for customer satisfaction, but also is crucial for financial purposes. If I operate at 10 kilometers per hour, I will need more vehicles to carry the same amount of people. So I will need to invest more money to get people in the same amount of people for the same trips and carry them to less satisfaction to them. If I were just able to increase from 10 to 20 kilometers per hour, I would actually need half the investment and I would make people twice as happy. So how can I actually go from something which is low because so safe to something which has the right speed? Well, I basically, and once again, this is how I do it. I do it through a thorough urban integration study. Final point, though we enable services, transport services, public transport services in low demand areas, and whoever deals with public transport knows that carrying public transport in conventional public transport in low demand area is a bloodbath, because it basically requires a lot of vehicles, a lot of investments just for very little ridership. So even if we enable that, especially in the medium term, at present it is really crucial to the service success to start in places in which we can actually have some level of ridership, to demonstrate that we can actually have solved the main public transport problem, which is that public transport today is not financially self-sustainable. Now, I've talked so much about urban integration that you might be scared of what urban integration might mean. So I just took a picture out of Google Maps of a street in Delft, which shows a perfect integration, which was not made for automated vehicles. It was made basically just to keep the maximum of safety. As you see, you have on the left-hand side pedestrians, and then you have separate from the pedestrians the bike lane, and then again separate from the main road. You have the bike lane is kept separate from the main road through a cushion of grass. Why this is so important? Because if a biker fell, it doesn't fall in the middle of the street. So you can actually avoid to slow down when you are overtaking a biker. So this is a crucial urban integration part. And you see the final part here is that the median of the street has a soft segregation. So it's not impossible to actually change lane. It's just that you do not do it just because you went wrong. And so you serve two purposes with that median. First, you can teach to the manual driver that if it's touching with the wheel, that median, the steering wheel start vibrating. So this means that basically he will know that is touching the median. So if he doesn't intend to, he will remain on his lane. But the other crucial thing is that the median is large enough to allow a little bit more room for the sensors to detect wrongdoing and understanding whether it's necessary to brake or not. You cannot actually have a fully automated vehicle speeding up close to another vehicle, because this means that if the other vehicle sways for any reason, the automated vehicle has no other option than crashing into it, while this is, of course, for safety reasons to be avoided. So what is the main problem of public transport and how automation can help? If we have origin and destinations of a trip in the outskirts of a city, the main problem today for public transport is basically bringing people last mile to the main public transport line. You see the blue segment that brings to the dotted line. Then you can have your trip by moving on your existing public transport network, which can have a radial line and a circular line, and at the end you can find another automated vehicle waiting for you at the end. However, the interesting thing is that we can fully automate vehicles for the first last mile, but also we can provide vehicles which are partly automated. For example, you drive a shared car to the station, then park the car at the station, and the car very slowly goes back to serve the next customer. So you basically have a fully automated, well, you have the same effect of a fully automated service, but you actually do it with the current state-of-the-art technology, keeping low speed services. But also on the yellow circular line, most of the cities don't have public transport, circular public transport, which are that effective, and with that you can, for example, do bus platooning. So you have several minibuses coming from different directions, which goes all to form a platoon with just one driver in a platoon of 6-7 small buses, which basically gives you the capacity of a tramway with the investment of a bus line. So what we can actually do first? Well, ride-share cars to the train stations and relocate them empty using either automation or platooning, depending on the local legal framework. Small 30 places electric buses, which can operate on demand for the last mile and in platoon at high speed, which means 70 kilometers per hour on high capacity corridors. And all this can be done without the revolution of needing to buy many new vehicles, but actually simply retrofitting automation on existing vehicles. This is the quick and fast way public transport has today to be automated. Much sooner private vehicles can be automated. Actually, this is the most crucial thing, because that you believe it or not, this is a war. If you allow vehicles, private vehicles, to become fully automated before you actually have made your public transport using automation features much more performing and much more attractive, well, the business for public transport might be at an end. And this can be really a problem for the sustainability of the cities. The second crucial point is that existing business models for cities, transit operators, car makers, etc., will all cease to exist. A new blurred ride services will replace them all, and cities will need to be able to actually guide this process, because otherwise you will find out exactly with what you do not want. So you have a time window which is very short, 5-7 years, not to start automating public transport, but to complete public transport automation. So to actually have it so well working that when in 5-10 years automated taxi services from BMW, from Google, from Mercedes, from no matter who will become available, they will have no customers, because people will be so much accustomed to the new form of public transport that they will not need to buy new cars, they will not seek for alternatives. And this is the only thing that can save the sustainability of living in your cities. Now, before thanking you for listening, and of course leaving you my email address, should you have any questions or anything, please email me. I will be very glad to take it over. I also would like to show the cover of the book that out of the CityMobile 2 experience is about to be published. It is released from Elsevier, the international publisher, on April 1st.
So thank you, Adriano, for this great presentation. Thank you also for the element of drama, which we enjoyed. Are there any questions? There is a question which I will bring up, a written question, but please add more questions in the chat box. Your main message, Adriano, is that cities have 5 to 7 years in order to implement, because technology is ready, humans are not, cities are not, but we should use these 5 to 10 years in order to get ready and to convert conventional collective mobility to automated mobility. Is that correct?
It is. Actually, you can already see it with Uber in London, in San Francisco, in many places. They showed ridership for conventional public transport declining. As soon as you get new forms of transport available, which are more convenient, the conventional public transport is getting less and less passengers. This was true. It has been true, for example, for the Autolib service in Paris as well, but not so much. Now, the more the new service will be convenient, so the cheaper and the better the service will be, the more it will subtract users to public transport. So the only real way for cities to defend themselves is to actually give to citizens high quality public transport in a way that that citizens will never require to have anything different, because it will be cheap and excellent at the same time. And actually, there's nothing better than ride a train downtown, because it's fast, because it's clean, because it's safe, because it's everything you need. But the problem is actually go to train station, and most of all, once you reach the other train station, go to destination, because very seldom your destination is in a train station.
Okay, good. I think this is clear. Now let's come to questions. The first one, sorry, I'm struggling. The first question, do you think that your system would be ready to operate without a steward, a driver, just in case? So
we already operated without a steward. We already operated without a steward in Greece. There was a legal framework that allowed, and we did that. Actually, they used the scapegoat of remote driver, which I don't particularly like, but I mean, this was the legal framework in Greece, and we used it. The problem of the steward is, as I see it, more a problem of not being confident with the technology. But once you are confident with the technology, if you have the legal framework that allows, you really don't need a steward.
So this was another question. Participants are really questioning your view. Another question is, do you really think that automated shuttles are mature and ready to implement? Your answer is clearly yes.
My answer is that shuttles might not be the answer to everything. So we demonstrated shuttles because this was what we could do with the amount of money we had from the European Commission. We do not believe shuttles to be the answer to all the problems. So shuttles can be a marvelous solution for last mile services close to a train station. Yes, this is a technology which is mature and we demonstrated and works. However, as I was saying in my presentation, the next step is higher speed. I mentioned 70 kilometers per hour. It's platooning, and so it means not just small vehicles, but platooning of larger vehicles. And most of all, what I said is ride-shared vehicles, which might even be at some point manually driven by one customer. So a shuttle are one arrow in the one tool in the toolbox. You have many different tools, and depending on the place in the city, there might be different solutions.
Okay. Another question is, what should cities do in order to start reconstructing infrastructure? What would be the first steps?
The first step is a safety analysis. Safety analysis for existing transport. If you know that your road do have accidents, don't just blame drivers.
Okay.
In those places, in the Netherlands, in France, in Japan, wherever there has been a safety analysis, already modification to the road layout has been made. And those modified streets are perfect for fully automated vehicles. As I just showed, the example of Delft is an example in which we did nothing. I mean, I just took the example as it is. It was perfectly made without me saying, I need this or that.
Okay, I'm going to read a question. It is a bit longer. It is a question from Helsinki, where the person just started a new European level automated vehicle public transport project that will lead to piloting fully automated vehicle last mile solutions in 2020. This project focuses on how cities can use automated buses in a systematic way. What do you see as the biggest challenge in combining existing public transport system with automated vehicles?
The biggest challenge is that right now we are thinking to automated vehicles as different vehicles, while automated vehicles are simply existing vehicles in which automation replaces the driver. So the main problems that shuttles do have today is that they are electrically and mechanically weaker than conventional vehicles. Of course, they are very young. They haven't made many miles traveled, so this is their main problem. However, the same concept, the same guidance technology which are applied to the shuttles can really be applied to any buses, to any car, and then you can create brand new transport services. And don't forget my last bullet in the conclusions. They will become all blurred services. It will not exist anymore a clear one service. Even the bus corridor, it might be a bus corridor at peak time, and then it just can be, for example, a reserved lane for automated cars off peak. Automated shared cars, of course.
Okay, thank you. I would now like to ask the other participants also to come online again. So Brian, could you join, because there are some general questions, and also Bernard, please join me here. One question, early question actually today was, what about freight transport? How do you see, you presenters, how do you see freight transport in this topic? Brian, is there anything going on in your city?
Yes, we are exploring freight delivery from autonomous small deliveries. I think it's like the general trend in mobility for people, in that we put in more and more demands on what we want, so that instantly, so the self-gratification of getting your deliveries very quickly has meant that the transmodal into smaller deliveries for personal use is a trend that we are noticing, and how that can be automated to meet with people's requirements and also the city's requirements to allow those freight deliveries to happen in the most sustainable way. So on the routes we're creating in Milton Keynes, we're also creating a freight network for small vehicles to deliver autonomously, and that could be to the workplace, to the home, or to the tailgate of the vehicle. So we're exploring how that might happen and how we might transship that freight from the edge of the city, where we might not in the centre of the city want to welcome the typical diesel delivery van in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If I may complement to this, I would say that I would divide the freight problem into the urban last mile delivery, which is one thing, and the other thing is the interurban trips for freight. And the interurban trips, I see a huge revolution coming with the truck platooning, because truck platooning basically will make much cheaper to bring goods on roads, even goods that were used to go to inland waterways or rail. So this means that there will be an important model shift, unfortunately, in the direction of the unsustainable thing. And this is something that cities and national authorities need to think about very carefully.
Okay, thank you. One last question also to the other speakers. How do you see the relationship between cycling, non-motorized transport in general, and automation? Is it the fight for the space on the road, segregated lanes for everybody, and then maybe cyclists being second priority? Or is it an opportunity with bikes perhaps being brought on automated vehicles to enable them to make longer trips? Brian, could you answer first?
I think that there is an issue. In fact, while we've been online, I've received an email that suggests a cyclist is unhappy because they came across one of our autonomous freight vehicles. So we've not cracked that one yet. We've got to learn from the experimentation we're undertaking within the cities and ensure that we don't do things to harm what is still a primary focus for our city, is to promote healthier options of walking and cycling. So again, in the words of the project, we've got to think long and hard about the coexistence, and it's the learnings we're taking. If we have a principle of we want to be infrastructure light, but respecting Adriana's point, safety has to be paramount. We need to learn from the experimentations and create the toolkits to allow the coexistence of cyclists, pedestrians, autonomy, especially where they're on shared services. So there's still a bit of work to do there, and we're not ignoring it.
A quick answer from Adriano.
I think that even in cycling or in walking, the differences must be made. For example, there is this beautiful example of the use case in Gothenburg that we are dealing with in the CoEXist project, in which you have these shared spaces. The shared spaces will always have priority for bikers and for pedestrians. And in fact, we are struggling to find the possibility for automated vehicle to move, because when you are in a very crowded environment and you want to be safe, the automated vehicle simply stops and waits for having a free space, which almost never happens. If you are thinking of longer distance journeys, this is a more a trickier part, because you really cannot mix vehicles or modes that are going at different speed. If you have a bike that goes at 20 kilometers per hour, or sorry, in the Netherlands at 30 kilometers per hour, you actually cannot mix it with vehicles going at 70. That's pretty clear. So you need to have separate lanes. Fortunately, if automation is very well implemented, and if it is implemented in a direction and with policies to actually have more use of shared vehicles, then this will decrease the overall number of vehicle mile traveled, freeing a lot of space on the infrastructures, which will allow us to actually reinvent the space in a new way.
Thank you very much, Adriano. We really must come to the close. Can I ask the final question to Bernard? So this afternoon, what should cities, representatives of cities, be considering of doing as a first priority?
I mean, first of all, I think it's important to say that cities should not get distracted by the future and to use this kind of uncertainty as an excuse of not acting. And that was the main message, I think, from my presentation, that cities can act now, and whether this is actually already deploying public transport vehicles like or shuttles or pods like in Milton Keynes, or just start off basically with the planning process or with the visioneering process. Because if you ask these questions related to what will automation do for freight or what will automation do for walking and cycling, I think at this moment there's two scenarios. There can be a heaven scenario and there can be the hell scenario in all these cases. But very important is that the cities together internally, but also externally with their stakeholders, start formulating basically a wish list about what automation should really bring to them, and so how can automation support their mobility goals.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bernard. This was a good final set of comments. We're a little bit over time. We had, looking at the statistics now, almost 100 participants. Most of you have stayed for the entire time. A few had to leave, but most are still on. Thank you very much for attending. Have a great afternoon. Greetings from Rome, from Milton Keynes, and from Cologne. So, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.